Hello again and welcome to the third segment of our tutorial on how to set up a Cardano stake pool on Windows. And in this tutorial, we are now going to register our stake pool to the blockchain using a metadata and some certificate files that we will generate as we go along this tutorial. And also, we are assuming that you have gone through the first two segments of our tutorial and you have generated all of the keys that we will need to register now our stake pool. Okay. Again, I have prepared for you a step-by-step guide so it will be easier for you to follow our tutorial when we register your stake pool. All right. But before we do the actual registration of our stake pool, we need first to configure the topology files on both our block producing node and our relay node. Okay, the topology file is actually located inside the configuration folders of Cardano, and it's called the mainnet-topology.json file. So if you open that, you will see a default entry such as this one. So in our relay node, it is fine if you just leave the default entry as it is, and then just add the IP address and the port number of your block producing node. And now that's in your relay node, correct? Now, in your block producing node, when you edit or configure the topology file, you must remove the default entry and just put the IP address and the port number of your relay node, because it is very important that your block producing node must only communicate with your relay node. All right. Now, once you save the topology files, you must restart your node and just stop and run it again in order for them to start communicating with each other. So it may take a while for your nodes to communicate with each other and start syncing again. So you will have to wait for a while before you can proceed with this tutorial. And also, it is very important that once you assign the port number, you need to set it also in your firewall configuration. To do that, and if you're using Windows Server, just open Server Manager and Tools and go to Windows Firewall. So you need to add an entry in both the inbound and the outbound, specifying that you are allowing the port number that you have just selected for your relay node and your block producing node. Okay, so that's done. Let's close it, and now we proceed with the actual registration of our stake pool. Now, before we proceed with the actual registration of our stake pool, there are a few things that you need to prepare. One is the minimum pledge amount for our stake pool. And if you open the mainnet-shelley-genesis file inside the configuration folder, it is indicated in poolDeposit as 500 million Lovelace. This is equivalent to 500 ADA tokens. Okay? So we need at least 500 ADA tokens in our payment address. Plus, of course, the transaction fee of, I suggest, at least 2 ADA tokens, okay, to cover the costs of sending back the change to our payment address, okay? And then the second one is the pool cost. Again, in the mainnet-shelley-genesis file, the minimum pool cost is 340 million Lovelace, or 340 ADA tokens. So this is the cost of maintaining your pools or your block producing node and your relay nodes, etc. Okay, so we'll use the default one, which is 340 ADA token. And then lastly is the pool margin, or the cost per epoch which is in percentage. All right, so we will discuss that later in the succeeding steps. Now, for the sake of this tutorial again, I have sent 500 added tokens to our payment address, including a few tokens to cover the transaction fees. So we will again query our payment address if we have received the 500, which is our pledge amount. Okay? So let's copy that command and paste it on our command prompt. We will now query our payment address if it has received the 500 ADA tokens that I sent a while ago. Okay. So now we have received the tokens that we need as our pledge amount. And then there are a couple of transactions here which we used in our previous tutorial. So when we register our stake pool, we will be using these two transaction hashes as inputs in our transaction because one, this is the pledge amount that we will need, and then we will get the transaction fees from this amount. All right, so now let's proceed with the first step, which is to create metadata for our stake pool, and then we will store it both in our node and in a publicly accessible URL that we own. So this is the file that I have generated for our metadata. So if we open the JSON file, here it is. So I used Learn Cardano on Windows as the stake pool name, and then we can specify any description here. And the ticker, make sure that your ticker is unique and it has not been used by any stake pool. So to find that out, use Yoroi mobile wallet or Daedalus desktop wallet and search for the ticker that you want to use and make sure it still doesn't exist. All right. And then the home page, this is the website that I will be using to post all our tutorials. Okay. So that's created now, and we proceed with the next step, which is to generate the hash of our JSON file. So here's the command. Let's now hash our metadata using this. So here it is. Let's copy the hash and save it in Notepad for future use. All right. So now we proceed with the next step, which is to generate our stake pool registration certificate file. So here is the template that we will use on how to generate the registration certificate for a stake pool. So we will just customize all the parameters with our files, keys, and values. All right. So as you can see, we will be using our cold verification key and the VRF verification key files. Okay. And the pledge amount, we use the minimum, which is 500 ADA tokens. The pool cost, the minimum is 340 ADA tokens. And the pool margin, we specify here as 2.5%. Okay. So here's the stake keys. And now we will specify the IP address of our relay node and not the block producing node, because we are doing this inside our block producing node. So make sure to specify here the correct IP address, which is of your relay node. And of course, the port number. And then the metadata that I created a while ago, I posted the file here in this website, which is must be publicly accessible. All right. And now the hash of our metadata, which we generated a while ago, we just paste it here, and we output the result to registration.certificate file. Now, once we have generated our registration certificate file, we can now open it using Notepad and see what it looks like. So here it is. All right. So we move on to the next step, which is to generate a delegation certificate this time for our pledge amount. All right. So here's the command. Let's copy paste that on our command prompt and tell CLI to output the result in delegation.cert file. Okay, let's do that. And now here's our delegation cert file. So now we move on to the most crucial part of this process, which is to submit the pool registration certificate and the delegation certificate files to the blockchain. So this means we are now going to create a transaction and attach our certificate files and submit it to the blockchain. All right. But before we do that, again, we have to ensure that we have the pledge amount of added tokens in our payment address and some amount of tokens to cover our transaction fees. All right. So we've done this a while ago. We have extracted the payment address and retrieved all the transaction list, which we need in our next step, which we will now create a draft transaction in order for us to calculate the minimum transaction fee. So let's go back to our list of transactions. We are now going to use these two transaction hashes for our draft transaction. And notice we have here a couple of transaction inputs because we will be using those two hashes with different amounts. Okay, so let's do that. Let's copy first the transaction hash containing our pledge amount. Okay, so let's paste it here. And of course, the transaction index is 0. Now let's copy the other hash for our transaction fees. Let's copy that and paste it here. And again, the index is also 0. So the rest of the parameters are 0 since this is just a draft. And now we are attaching both registration certificate and delegation certificate files. So let's copy that and execute it in our command prompt. So here is now our draft transaction. All right. So the next step is we calculate the minimum transaction fee. Okay, and notice here we have witness count of 3 because we are going to sign the final transaction with 3 signing keys, including our code signing key. So for now, let's copy that and calculate our minimum transaction fee out of the draft transaction that we just created. All right. So the suggested transaction fee is 199,865. Lovely. So again, let's copy that and paste it in our template for our next step. As our next step, we will now determine the TTL or time to live for our transaction to be added in a block. So let's query first the latest slot in the network. Now it says it's 516.99956. So let's copy that and paste it in our template. So we are going to add, instead of 200 slots, we will be going to add 2,000 slots instead. And the reason for that is because our tutorial is going to take a little while to finish. And so it will take some time for us to submit our signed transaction file. Okay, so here is the template now. And again, we are going to copy the transaction hashes and index in our input. Okay, let's copy those and paste them here. Right. Now, to calculate the change, we need to know the balance of our transaction hashes. So remember, we have the first hash contains 5 million or 500 million, And then the second hash contains 2.8 million. So we add those, and this is the balance of our transaction hashes. Okay? And then we deduct, of course, the pledge amount, which is 500 million Lovelace. All right? So if we deduct that from here, we are simply deducting the transaction fee now from the remaining amount. Okay? So if we subtract the transaction fee from this, this is now the change that we need to send back to our payment address. So let's copy that and paste it in our template. So here we are attaching again both our certificates, and then we tell the CLI to output the result to tx.raw file. Okay, so that's complete now, and let's proceed by creating our raw transaction file. So here it is. So let's move on to the next step. We are now going to sign the raw transaction using 3 signing keys. That is why our witnesses is actually 3. All right, the witness count here is 3 because we are now going to sign with 3 signing keys. Okay, so here's again the command, and the output will be saved in tx.sign file. So make sure all the signing keys are here: payments signing key, stake signing key, and the code signing key. All right. So that's done. Here is now our final signed transaction. All we need to do now is submit the signed transaction to the blockchain, which is our next step. So let's do that. Transaction has been submitted. Again, it may take a little while for our transaction to be fully registered on the blockchain, but for now, we can verify if our stake pool registration was successful by getting our pool ID using this command. So let's do that, and let's check our command prompt. So here is our stake pool ID. We can also save our stake pool ID into a file using this command. So it's now saved inside the stake pool ID file. All right. Now, while waiting for our relay node to fully propagate and get accepted by the network of peers, which is actually going to take several hours, and there is a few more steps that we need to take if we go to the developer's website of Cardano and under the configure topology files. We need to update our topology with the list of peers, and it's going to take a while. And this example actually is intended only for Linux, so I might come up with a separate video tutorial discussing this topic for Windows. All right? But for now, while waiting for our relay node to propagate, we can already check actually if our stake pool has been successfully registered on the blockchain using this website. So if you go to pooltool.io and search for our ticker that we used, and in our case, we used LCW. So let's type it here, CW. And here it is. Here is our stake pool now on the blockchain with all the corresponding parameters that we passed during the registration process. All right, so to wrap up our third segment of this tutorial, I would like to congratulate you for successfully setting up and registering a stake pool in Cardano. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you on my next tutorial. Bye-bye.